Welcome back to Sacred Rhythms. I am so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you've come again. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk briefly about the third of the Triduum services, namely Easter Vigil. Now, you'll remember how I said that the Triduum services go together. They're actually one big service stretched out over 3 days, which is also the reason why at Holy Trinity we put all 3 worship services of the Triduum into one bulletin to make that point visually with our congregation. Well, at the end of Tenebrae, you remember how the Christ candle was used in a particular way to remind us that the light of the world went down into death as the candle went into the sacristy and then came back into the chancel to remind us that death did not have the last word, because the whole time the candle is a light, the candle stays lit, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it, is the way that Tenebrae pretty much ends. So at the end of the Tenebrae service, we have segued into Easter, because the light came out of the sacristy back into the chancel. And Easter Vigil is really the first of the Easter services. Isn't that cool how liturgy does this? That is so cool. You know, all of those sunrise services on Easter that you have at like 6 o'clock in the morning, all those sunrise services, they actually have their start in the Easter Vigil, because what those moderns forgot is that for the church, the day begins at sunset and goes to the next sunset. The day does not begin for the church at sunrise and go to the next sunrise. It begins at sunset the night before. What this means is that after Easter Vigil, we can have a glass of wine and some chocolate pie, because it is Easter. It's Easter. The Easter Vigil is held after sunset on Holy Saturday, because in the church the day goes from sunset to sunset, not sunrise to sunrise. So the vigil begins. The vigil itself begins after sunset. Now you can find an entire liturgy that will tell you step by step how to do a vigil in the LBW Minister's Desk Edition on pages 143 to 151. That's 143 to 151 in the LBW Minister's Desk Edition. And if you don't want to do the entire vigil service, which is several hours long, then you can find which lessons it's okay to leave out by looking at the version in Evangelical Lutheran Worship, ELW, on pages 266 to 270. And this is really well, never mind. You can find which hymns, which scriptures it's okay to leave out if you want to do the vigil. And the lessons, if you do the whole vigil, you're doing 12 to 15 lessons with a psalm after each one and a prayer after the psalm. So you might want to take a look at how to do a shortened version, or not. Anyway, this wonderful service, it begins with everybody in the narthex holding candles which are not yet lit as the pastor builds the Easter fire outside the church, which that's pretty funny. Anyway, Then the Paschal candle is lit and processed into the church, followed by all of us who light our candles from the Paschal candle, and then the cantor sings the special Easter proclamation, the Exultet. And then we have the Liturgy of the Word with its many readings about the story of salvation history, what God has gone through to save us. Each Old Testament reading is followed by a psalm, usually. Sometimes it's from Psalms. Sometimes it's like the Song of Miriam or the Song of the Three Young Men Who Haven't Been Burned Up in the Fire. But anyway, the lesson is followed by a psalm, which is followed by a prayer. And then comes the New Testament lesson after a bunch from the Old Testament, after which all of the lights come on in the church. See, the whole time it's been dark except for candlelight in the church as we sing the Gloria and as we hear the sermon. Now, for this service, Easter Vigil, lots of congregations throughout the world have used St. John Chrysostom's Easter prayer. And you can find it on the internet, not Easter prayer, Easter sermon. And you can find it on the internet and you can download it and you can give it yourself if you want to. Lots of churches all throughout Christianity, lots of congregations have done this. St. John's Easter sermon is a wonderful sermon. It's a wonderful sermon, and you might like to do that just because it is tradition. I mean, we did it for several years. We don't do it anymore, but we did it for a number of years, and St. John Chrysostom has a really good Easter sermon that covers all of the bases. Of course, I guess from St. John Goldenmouth, you would expect a beautiful, wonderfully done Easter sermon, and you get one. Anyway, after the sermon, we sing the Litany of the Saints, and then we move into the affirmation of baptism, complete with spritzing the whole congregation, or we have a celebration of baptism itself. Although in our congregation, we have found that it's better to have the affirmation of baptism with the spritzing than the baptism of a real baby or a real adult, because this service is so different from our usual services and it feels weird, which is not what really we want them to experience. Although Catholics have baptisms at the vigil service and they celebrate confirmations at the vigil service, we kind of think it works better to have an affirmation of baptism with the spritzing, but it's up to you. And anyway, after this, then we get into the communion, which is the first communion of the new Easter season. Of the Holy Week services, it's Tenebrae and the Easter Vigil that really feel most ancient. I mean, they feel old, but I guess they feel that way because they are really, really old. But through all 3 days of the Triduum, you really do feel like you're actually a pilgrim, like you are actually keeping Jesus company through the last week of his life here on earth. And I just think that is so cool. But that's also what liturgy does. And it is what Ageria intended. I'd like to thank you for coming. And I'll see you soon as I get recovered from Easter. And I hope that the rest of this Holy Week, tonight is Maundy, Thursday, And then tomorrow is Good Friday, and then we've got Easter Vigil, and then we've got Easter itself. I hope that the rest of this Holy Week is absolutely blessed for you, and that you find yourself keeping company with Jesus in all sorts of ways, just like Ageria intended.